Hello and welcome back to the Y Comics Podcast. I'm your host Jesse, and with me today is one of the writers of the Cloak and Dagger TV show, and the writer of comics such as Infidel and next week, The Good Asian. It's Pornsak Pichetshote. I think I said your last name wrong, even though we practiced it. I know on your Twitter you see a face blindness. I have name blindness, basically. Where
I might have that as well, so no worries.
because like I was talking to I had a D&D with friends last night, and we were talking about My Hero Academia.
Mhm,
And this is just me with every TV show and every book and everything. Where I'm like,
mhm.
yeah, the lightning guy. He's like, haven't you seen 5 seasons of this show? I'm like, I wouldn't know your name unless we had to talk to each other every day. Like that's just how this works for me.
That's fantastic. That is
So yeah,
absolutely
I'm
awesome.
I'm so bad with names. It's one of the qualities of my life I would like to change. Is like just be better
No,
with names.
don't worry about it. And actually, my name is deceptively not tricky. It's actually completely phonetic. So it's Pornsak Pichetshote. So it's almost exactly the way it looks on the
Okay,
page.
yeah. It's the thing is like you get tricked for so long that you're like I gotta believe it has to be something else.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. Like people want to like add an extra thing to it, and it's actually exactly the way it looks.
I want to. Well, first off, how are you doing? I want to always ask
Uh,
that.
Thank you, thank you. Doing well. Like I said, I'm at a different place than I usually am. I'm at my sister's, so I appreciate you. You know, the lights might flicker
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, but I appreciate I appreciate you asking.
This must be a very exciting week because The Good Asian comes out next week, and everybody's reading it now. Like the previews, I read it this morning,
Awesome.
and like I love getting the previews, but also I'm like I want the physical book in my hand because
Yeah,
that's the way I like to read.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm the same way. It's so funny because, and I'm glad to hear you say that because I'm exactly the same way, which is one of the reasons why that like, and not, it wasn't entirely intentional, but like, there's a little bit more in the actual, not in terms of story or comics,
Yeah,
but like just in terms of design pages and back matter and all that. There's a little bit more in the physical sort of comic than in the digital. So
yeah,
even if you've read the digital, like the advanced PDFs that reviewers have, like you'll still get something, I hope, from like
yeah.
actually having that comic in your hand and reading it.
And seeing all the covers because you just posted all the covers for the first issue because you got them all. It's like,
Yeah.
man, this is the first book. I'm like, I want all those covers, but I don't have the budget for all those covers.
Hey, I feel the same way. You know, it's so funny because I was just talking about this with somebody. You know, I I'm sort of an old fogey of just kind of like our variant covers bringing down the world and blah 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 blah. You know, but like my friend, I talked about with my friend Jody Lehup, who does
Yeah,
Shirtless Bear Fighter and he does Weatherman, and he's got this great perspective on them that he sort of says every artist that you get for a variant cover, it increases the world of your book.
hmm
It it lets people see different variations and aspects and interpretations of what you've done, and actually makes the world bigger and makes it a sort of bigger a conversation. And ever since he said that, I think he kind of turned me like 180 on like variant covers because like when you see all that sort of stuff, you see there's a richness to the world in a
yeah.
different way than if it's just you and your team.
And I think variants, depending on the company, because there's some
Yeah,
companies that do too many variants, but I think depending on the variants of how many variants you're getting on a book, lets people know, hey, you might want to check this out. Because if a book's
yeah,
getting the variants, that means that the company behind the book's like, this is going to be big enough to warrant all these variants.
yeah. There's
Some
also that too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some companies that are like, I got the money, I'm just gonna get the variants for all of my
Right.
books. But yeah, I think variants are some also indicator of how big a book is going to be, or how much a company believes in a book.
And also
Um,
sometimes how much a retailer
yeah,
believes in
that
a
too.
book.
Yeah,
Like, you know, like I was impressed. I was impressed by the number of stores that kind of came on and that they wanted they wanted to do stuff. And it just shows like they believe they have an audience to sort of push this stuff,
yeah.
which is great.
I want to talk about the Good Asian a lot because there's a lot
Sure.
about that I really want to talk about. But I do want to talk about Infidel first
Sure.
because that's one. So for a long time, I wasn't getting into indie books just because all of them were being published and then being sold out, so I could never get a copy. And then I was like, I'm just gonna read on my phone because
Mm.
I needed to start doing that. My tablet's junk, so my phone will work. And Infidel was one of the books that was with Comixology Unlimited,
Yeah.
and all my friends were talking about. So I'll read this. That is a terrifying book.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
As someone who my writing credits is our bread and butter like horror stories, I was like, oh, this is something else.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So from one
Well,
horror writer to another, it's extremely good.
thank you. I very much appreciate that. And all the credit in the world goes to my my co my in any event, yeah, no, thank you. First of all, thank you, and all the credit also goes to my co-creators Aaron Campbell and Jose Villarrubia and Jeff Powell. It's a wonderful team working on that book, and I had a great time working with them.
With writing this kind of horror, because like most horror is very, I'm trying to find the right term for it, like genre specific horror. Like this is going to be a ghost story, and which this is Infidel is a ghost story in a lot of ways, but it's a social horror in most
Yeah.
ways, and social horror doesn't get done as much. I feel like the last social horror movie I could think of was It Follows that I watched.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
and that one's like, because that one's like all about the idea of STDs and stuff, but as
Yeah. Yeah.
monsters. So like,
Yeah.
Infidel is like a horror about racist ghosts,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so it's very much social in that way. So like, why did you decide that was the horror you were gonna go for?
It was funny. I think where it started from with me was, the kernel of the idea came in 2009, where we had just elected a black president, so therefore we had licked racism, but meanwhile, like Islamophobia was like skyrocketing,
Yeah,
and so there was this idea to talk about the links between the two, and to use that to talk about just race and how and at the time too, I wanted to take a look at how like what racism looked like in sort of liberal communities as well, and all those ideas would get sort of a lot more relevant after the 2016 sort of election, and so we
yeah,
started to have this very large conversation about race as a country. um, from there, I think, and I think part of it was working for Vertigo for as long as and being a fan of comics and genre. There's a little bit of like when you look at these ideas, there's a little bit of like a rolling, like spinning wheel of fortune where you like are constantly looking like, ooh, what genre can I use to sort of explore this?
yeah,
And so the idea of sort of like a lot of the themes of like gaslighting clicked along with like a lot of the moves and the tropes of a ghost story, and
yeah,
so it all kind of worked really well. I think about a lot is something like Mike Carey had talked about sort of when he's writing comics, and for him, it's about sort of where you plant your tent and what soil you plant your tent. And if you plant your tent in the right soil, in this particular case, if you plant your tent in political soil, the story becomes political, and you don't have
yeah,
to work for the story to become political. You don't have to editorialize. The politics are it's literally rooted in the material, and so therefore, like finding this angle on a haunted house story and setting my soil as very political, or rooted in social causes in this particular case, or social issues. It allowed me to just tell a story, and because the characters are steeped in that world, that aspect of it came through, and so you don't have to work as hard
yeah.
to editorialize or send a message or anything like that.
And I love the idea of like where you plant your flag, the story will just come from there.
Yeah.
Because you can tell, and I've definitely been a writer that's done that, where I've planted my flag somewhere else, but I tried to tell stories like
Yeah.
across the
Yeah.
field, and
Right. 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 Yeah.
it doesn't
It
mix.
doesn't work. Yeah.
And so like yeah, it's very important that as a writer, as a creator in general, like what you want to say, that you start there, and then
Yeah.
spread out from there. So you say you're from working at Vertigo for so long. I just kind of want to know, what is your origin with comics and then in comics? Like, so where did you
Okay.
first started reading books, or like where was the first book that you fell in love with the medium?
Uh, I don't know what well, okay. My first comic was Amazing Spider-Man number 230, which is the second half of Nothing Stops the Juggernaut.
Okay.
And then that would lead me into my first, because I ask this question a lot when I'm talking to people. The first comic I ever like read or followed and collected was Marvel Tales, back when they were reprinting the old Stan Lee, Steve
Oh
Ditko
yeah,
Spider-Man.
yeah,
So that was kind of like my entry point. And it was sort of casual sort of at that point. And I think when it picked up was when I was 12, the family moved to Thailand, and we moved like the way it kind of worked was that like the way it worked in my family was mom and dad were like, we're going to Thailand for a year. So we're like, okay. So we all go to Thailand. And then like 1 year becomes 2 years, becomes 3 years. You're like, oh, I think we live in Thailand now. I think they just moved us to Thailand. And so for me, there was a piece of me that was like wondering who I would be if I stayed in America. And oddly enough, comics and TV and movies, but mostly comics and TV, because that's the stuff that was free and or
yeah,
cheaper to afford, was my sort of connection to sort of my old life in America. And so in that sort of adolescent sort of growing up way, your wires get crossed a little bit. And so for me, there was something about like, the more I knew about comics and TV, the more I could almost know about the person I would be if I never left.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuck with me sort of all through my life. And that got me really, so by the time I came to America for college, like because in Thailand, like I had a very limited pool of comics to choose from, American comics to choose from. And then when I got to America, I had all these comics to choose from, but I still had that, that yearning was sort of, still sort of imprinted on me. And so that, that sort of passion for comics and TV, that would get me to a point where I, ended up taking a job as an assistant editor at Vertigo, which was DC's, creator-owned imprint, and at the time, and yeah, and that, at the time I took that, I still wanted to be a writer, but I took that job because it seemed like a opportunity of a lifetime to like work and learn from some of the writers who inspired me and some of the editors who inspired me. And that time just treated me really well. I went from assistant editor up to editor within the span of about 7 years. From there, I got invited to be part of a think tank to turn comics into other media out on the West Coast. And so I headed up DC's TV division and helped sort of start out the Arrowverse. And that was about 4 years. But then after that, I kind of wanted to get back to telling my own stories, which is kind of like, it was just wonderful, but in a way, a digression from like me telling my own stories that I wanted to do 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of went back and sort of started my career as a writer.
That's honestly the most kind of inspiring story I've gotten so far on this show, because the idea that you reading comics while you were over in Thailand is like, what would I be like, what is my other possible futures, is so honestly inspiring in a lot of ways. It's like it's kind of what I love about the books too, is like this could be the best of me if I had all the right things fall into place. I mean, maybe not Peter Parker, because Peter Parker himself is a flawed character, but most superheroes, like, this is the best version of me. They have flaws, but they are the best versions of what humans can possibly achieve in some point. I mean, that's the whole goal of Superman, right? Superman is the pinnacle of what a human could be. He's the savior of the weak in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's funny. I hadn't really thought about that, but there's a lot of truth to that. And I think there's a lot of truth into sort of like how the way those comics imprinted themselves on me as well. Yeah. That's really interesting.
All right. So finally, the thing that everybody wants to hear about, The Good Asian, the comic that comes out next week, next Wednesday, the best comic of the week. I'm going to say that right now. I don't remember what else is coming out next week, but I know that this is the best comic of the week.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
This comic, for me personally, comes out at a very interesting time in my media consumption, because I watched recently Brick by Rian Johnson.
Oh yeah.
And awesome. I mean, I've been obsessing over Warrior in general, because I think the show's so well done, and I just love action things, and so like getting a good action scene in every episode really helps that show. But this, so I've been on a really big Noir kick, and I've been on a very big like just Asian history kick, because of just the way like the world kind of is right now, and like how little I was taught about things. And so this book is very much a medium for the two things I've been super fascinated about. And
that's great. That's awesome.
So it just hits on every single level. Like the dialogue is, I mean, fair warning to anybody who reads the book, the dialogue is going to be rough because of the time that the book is set in, but it's tonally perfect for a noir. It's totally perfect for the era, and the art is who's the artist and colorist on
Alexander Tefengi is the artist. Lee Lowridge is the colorist. They're both awesome. I met Alex through this project, and he is actually, I'm going to be calling him later on today when he has a 2-month-old, and so his life is chaos. But hopefully I will talk to him later on today. And we've become like just good friends through this process. And Lee Lowridge, actually, I've known for over 10 years. He was the very first comics professional that I got drinks with and hung out with. So it's one of the things I love about comics. It's a chance to, catch up with your old friends, but it's also a chance to make new friends.
Yeah, just everything about the style of the book and the writing and the art and the colors themselves just meld into a perfect era of comics, and also a perfect era that you're trying to portray. So when you're reading it, you just get sucked in by like the second page. Like I'm reading the main character talk to the young kid about like, don't worry, like either America will accept you or they won't, and you'll see who it truly is. And like I'm reading this and I'm like, we're 2 pages in and it's telling the more compelling story than 90% of comics going on at times. Like,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
so
I appreciate that.
and it feels like this comic too has been in development for a while. Like the way that you
Yeah.
talk about it and stuff on Twitter and through other interviews. Because I listened to your word balloon one. It's like it seems like
Oh, cool.
this has been a minute. Like you've been working on this for a
Yeah.
minute. And so
I actually started working on this before Infidel. At
yeah,
least the research for it and like getting, the way it tends to work for me is I'm not as prolific as I like to be, but yet I have so much stuff on my plate that that I have if I have an idea, it usually has to sit around for a while before I actually have the time to write it, which is good and it ends up being good for the work itself. It's
yeah.
not by design, but it ends up being good for the work itself because it gives me more time to obsess and like do background research on it and all that stuff.
And then having Infidel be your Infidel was your first book, right? And then this would
Yeah,
be the second, right?
yeah.
Like like how does it feel to have two 10 out of 10 comics like right off the bat? But you know what I'm saying? Like the way that they gestate, like the way you like let them sit and like settle, they're so impactful. Like the first, I mean, I'm again just basing this off the first issue of the Good Asian,
Okay.
but comparing to Infidel, is like Infidel was perfect for the time, and through the time up to now, it's still like very impactful.
Yeah.
And I think the Good Asian's hitting exactly at the time that it's going to be the most impactful, and probably continue to be is like extremely impactful from here on out. And it's just wild to me that see
Yeah.
a writer nail it twice.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I don't know if I have any wood, but like knock on wood that it is impactful and that it is that it does find an audience. It's so funny. The one thing I will say, and it's all the credit in the world that I give to Image, is that, and I don't want to say it in a way just like to slight any of the other publishers, but the way Image is set up just as a company, they're so, you get greenlit and you go, and it's not like got to run stuff up the flagpole with editors and with this and with sort of all that. And so for a lot, for both Infidel and The Good Asian, there were aspects about it sort of when it pitched where we had no idea it was going to be relevant,
Yeah,
right? So like, when we pitched Infidel before the 2016 election. And so the idea about talking about racism in sort of liberal communities, and not that that was a big portion of the book, but like there was definitely a conversation that I had very early on where it's like, no, this book doesn't take place in Kansas. This stuff happens in New York.
yeah,
Like, let's talk about what it looks like in New York. Racism exists in New York, you know? And so, but at the time that it was pitched, they weren't conversations that were sort of talked about.
yeah,
And so to have a publisher that gives you the freedom to say, and I think if I learned anything from Infidel too, Infidel, every issue of that book, I made a decision that kind of stressed me out. That kind of like, I don't know if the audience will go with me. Like, I don't know if the audience is going to agree with me on these sort of things, but it's what I, from looking at the world outside my window, really believe to be true.
yeah,
And I made my choices accordingly. And that taught me, and that was an experience that was rewarded. And so that was definitely something I brought into the Good Asian, which is like, I don't know if anyone agrees with me. I don't know if people want to talk about Asian American history. I don't know if there's any interest for it, but like, this feels like the right moment to talk about this. So I'm going to talk it as truthfully as I can based on the knowledge and the research that I've done. And then the world kind of, caught up to a certain extent. And the way the Good Asian has been sort of relevant with, the rising rate of anti-Asian hate crimes has been very surreal and very weird all through the writing of the book to sort of the announcement of the book. And
yeah,
I have been trying to figure out like how to sort of place the book along that conversation just for myself, forget like with other people. And so the whole relevance, and a lot of time, like for me, I don't realize the relevance of it, you know that it's going to be relevant when I'm sort of pitching the book. Most of the time it just comes from this idea of like, this is something we're not talking about, and let's talk about it. And you get lucky if the world is in the mood to talk about it, if the
yeah.
world is, it wants to have that conversation.
I know that we all love the crowd that's like keep politics out of comics. They're the
Yeah.
best. But I think properties like The Good Asian and Bitterroot, and then like talking about TVs and movies like Warrior and like I'm watching Killing Eve. I was watching Killing Eve.
Okay.
The stuff that they deal with in that, like some of the weird tropes that they deal with that. It's like make good stories around these topics and you will get people so interested in it that they will actually go and research. And I think that's really important in general. It's like no, don't keep the politics, don't keep the conversation out of the book, because if the book is good and it generates those topics, then you're gonna have the readers go, man, I need to know what actually happened in this time, because there's so much. Like again, I'm reading the book and I'm like, I didn't know any of this happened, like any of these things happened. I didn't know people were, I know people were treated poorly a lot and still are, but I was like I didn't know that there was this bad in these areas.
Right.
And it's so eye-opening in so many ways that it's like, man, I got a good book and I got a slap in the face to like realize like the history of this world.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. And yeah, I think, like any stories, you can tell them well and you can tell them poorly. And I do think sort of like for, political stories or stories that deal with sort of social issues and all that, the tightrope is a little more narrow. There's less of a margin for error. But I do think when you're telling these stories, what a lot of times what it comes down to, it is that it's less about, I get people who say, when people say, I don't want politics in my books or I don't want social issues in my books, I think what they're actually saying is I don't want it done badly.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is it's in every book. It's in every sort of story. And there's certain stories where they acknowledge it a little bit more, where it says, well, let's not overlook these aspects. And like in any story, and again, it depends on your intent, but the fuller, the more three-dimensional, the rounder the picture, the more engaging the story is. So I think it really is just a matter, so telling these kind of stories, it's less of, oh, I want there to be politics, and it's just more about, or I want to say something about the world and all that. It's more just about, let's just be honest about what this looks like. Let's, have sort of a richer, richer specificity, and it is just sort of an evolution of the storytelling. It's the same reason why when you're watching Star Trek, the original series, there's a certain glossing over of science that you're fine with, but then but you can't watch that same show now without getting a little bit more into the specifics of what we know about science and all that. So that specificity is what changes and evolves over time. And then you're just hoping to sort of be on the right side of sort of history on it. There's a lot of stuff that was very progressive for the time, and you look at it now and you're just like, ooh, I don't know about that.
Well, I'm actually like I'm watching the original Star Trek for the first time with my parents slowly, and it is like some of like the issues that they're tackling. I'm like, oh, this is brilliant for the time it came out. Like these are the issues that it's going for. And then every once in a while I'm like, ooh, there's the age showing. Totally. And the same thing, like I watched through Deep Space Nine recently. It's the same thing. Like that's in the 90s. A lot of really progressive things in there, but at the same time, every once in a while I'm like, that one doesn't hit right.
Right.
And I think with stories like The Good Asian and like Superman Smashes the Klan, or even like modern, like not modern, but like main continuity comics, like what's going on currently in Batman, because like it always comes back to Batman with me. The social issues that they're tackling, Batman's probably the lightest of them all, because it is talking about wealth, and it's also talking about kind of vigilantism and how, like, are the cops effective, are they not effective, things like that. It's dealing with those issues, but on a very low level, to the point that you can miss them completely, which is totally fine, because it's still telling a very good narrative that propels the book. But then with The Good Asian and Superman Smashes the Klan, it's like, no, these are the issues that we want to talk. Like Superman Smashes the Klan, like alienation and racism. Let's talk about it. But it does it so perfectly well that if you do not like what it's trying to tell you, then you need to talk to yourself. Because it's not doing it in a way that makes you feel like it's targeting someone. It's showing you, like, no, this is bad and this is good and this is how these play out. And then The Good Asian does a really good blend of mixing the good and the bad, and showing that, like, with your lead being a cop, like in working with I remember the partner's name, but he's
O'Malley, yeah.
O'Malley, like he's the worst. Like it's like, but he's working with him because he's like, I gotta play the game, like I gotta play this game, and so like you are mixing both the like in your face good versus evil, but with the gray in it too, because there's gray and like and that has to play into it. So I think like it's a good blend of everything right there.
Well, thank you. I really.
And then
do
the noir
appreciate
part,
that.
it's good noir. Like it's just good.
Yeah.
The dialogue's so good.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I really appreciate that because the dialogue, especially, is something. I think it's accurate to say I labored over the dialogue.
Well, that's how good noir works, right? Is the dialogue involved? Because if the dialogue's bad in noir, the story's bad.
Yeah,
like that's the pinnacle of that genre.
Yeah, no, it's really true, and it's funny too because like there's a certain like 1930s patois that you've got to calibrate just right because you lean too hard, it borders into self-parody. But at the same time. And I've seen actually a lot of writers do away with it completely, and it still works. That the ambiance kind of like sets it up enough. But for this particular book, because we were being so specific in our accuracy on so many different aspects, it felt like we had to find our own balance on the slang of the time versus having it sound contemporary to our ears.
Yeah, and like a comic I would compare it to, at least dialogue wise, is like Sandman Mystery Theater.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah.
Like Matt Wagner did a really good job.
He did a great job.
Up the dialogue and the tone of that era, and the art.
Yeah.
Like the art always helps that, but it's very key. And like talking about Brick is like Brick set in the high school.
Yeah.
But like watch like a half an hour in, you just forget that. You just forget it because the dialogue's so on point, and it's different than other types of mystery. To compare and contrast Rian Johnson movies, like Knives Out is an Agatha Christie mystery. That is not the same as a noir mystery. So the dialogue is very snippy and like very quick, and everybody's very prompt and precious, and like they're so different. And I think some people, like general audiences, kind of like don't remember the difference in mysteries. They just think of Agatha Christie mysteries or or Murder She Wrote mysteries. Where noir is such a dirtier, grimier thing, and the dialogue's more like phrases and catchphrases and idioms and stuff like that, instead of like just very quick and to the point.
And it's tricky too because like in a way it's not like noir isn't a genre like horror. You can set some goalposts that you may say, oh, this is a horror book. Noir has there's so much subtlety in sort of the tropes and all that, so it's like you have to hit it at a bunch of different angles very gently, because like it's something like we thought about a lot on this book. It's like if you have too many fight scenes in a noir book, well then it turns into Batman. Exactly. So like so you've got like there's all these little aspects that you need to kind of keep it within the, especially what we're doing, which is sort of that detective gumshoe noir of like keeping it there, but take like our book is very much influenced by like the pulp novels, the Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe and like Lou Archer, like all those novels, as opposed to the movies, which even that is a different type of noir than the old detective noir that came from the books.
I think one of the bigger like story pacing things too that people don't pick up on all the time is the plotting of it, the pacing of it. It's like there's a sense of space in noir stories that you don't get in most mysteries, because the mysteries have to go clue to clue to clue. The thing about Sherlock Holmes is like he's always moving, he's always doing something, he's always thinking, and that's the reason he's like so compelling as a detective. But noir, it's your detective and noirs have to get a clue and think about it, because they're not like on it right away. They're like thinking, and that's like the best thing about the art. And like I'm gonna like nerd out. It's like one of my favorite things about movies doing this too, but you can do it with comics because comics are just such a good medium for it. Is when he hyper focuses on something, and so the art zooms in, and then you get the great color work of the box around it to like different like to show it's a clue for him. And then after you see it, he tells you what he just saw and how he's analyzing it, and like that just works. It just works.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun. That was something that me and Alex talked about a lot. It was like, it's funny, like, Batman's probably one of the most famous detectives like in all of pop culture, but aside from Batman, and because Batman is so often more in superhero mode than detective mode, there aren't a ton of detectives in comics,
Yeah.
you know, at least in contemporary comics. And you see a lot more of them in, you know, film and TV. And as a result, you've seen all these like cinematic techniques to show how a detective thinks. But one of the fun things we found in this book was like, oh, there hasn't been as much co- comics to talk about sort of using the language of comics to sort of show that. So this was our sort of opportunity to do that and think like, all right, what can we do to show in the same way that like in Sherlock, they're doing stuff that's very specifically cinema to show how Sherlock Holmes thinks. What can we do in comics to make it like to show how Edison Hart thinks, while at the same time, and I think it goes back to what you were saying about how, you know, they don't just go from clue to clue to clue. The other thing about noir is that they're not super detectives.
Yeah.
They're not, right? They're just regular guys. That's the greatest thing about Philip Marlowe. Like the thing I love about Philip Marlowe is like Philip Marlowe's basic superpower is just being an asshole. Like he's basically like, he's just like, he'll sit around, he'll be a dick. People will get aggravated. They'll tell him something they shouldn't tell him because he's such a dick. And he's like, all right, well, there's something that, and I'm just gonna go to this or the next thing. It's one of the things I love the most about that character. So for this, it was sort of trying to toe this line of, I want to use the language of comics to sort of talk about the things that he can do while still keeping grounded and relatable, that he's just a regular guy, that he's not just like Sherlock Holmes and can like do all this stuff.
And there's a sense of talking about jadedness. Like most noir detectives are pretty jaded.
Yeah.
And like that's why a lot of times like they're called private dick, not just because it's short for detective, but also because they're just jerks. And there's an you can overdo it, and it becomes self-parody of itself.
Yeah.
And you can underdo it, and you could be like, why is he doing this at all? Like, what's the point? Because that hardness does give them that motivation to keep going, because they're so tired of everything. They're just always so tired of everything.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
And I was just saying, like in general, in most mediums, like good noir has gone the way of a good western, where westerns were everywhere, noir was everywhere. And now it's kind of just died out. So you only get a good noir story like once every 5 years from people. Like you don't get it all the time. So when it's good and it nails it, it's like, this is dessert. This is the best thing.
Really,
and it's the same thing with a good western. It's like when a good western comes out, you're like, this is the life.
yeah. That's really true. Yeah, I'm trying to think like, God, when was the last good western? I mean, Pulp was kind of the last good western because that was like the blend between, that was a blend between crime and western and westerns, but it was still very much a western.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, you're right. It's tough to find like a good western comic is few and far between. Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you for super long. So I want to move into some questions that people submitted for the show this week.
Sure, cool.
So Jonathan Thompson asks, what's your process on pitching a book, and what does pitching a book mean to you? Like, what's kind of do you go in it like full emotion, is like, this is why I'm doing this, like this is why I'm giving you this book right now, or is it kind of just like, I'm just gonna give them the book and see what they think?
So I always feel guilty because it sounds like I'm shilling for myself and trying to sell product.
Yeah.
But it's also the reason why I did it. If you have or buy or take it out from your library or get it through Comixology Unlimited, the trade for Infidel, I actually include the 16-page pitch packet that we use to get Infidel greenlit, and that is everything. Like there was nothing extra in that pitch packet that I did in order to get that book sort of across, so people can see exactly what I did to get that and how I pitch a book. That said, and I'm working from memory now, there is usually a cover letter, and that cover letter is also in the pitch packet, where I just try to tell the story in sort of a paragraph, what the hook of the story is and all that in sort of a paragraph. I am a very big believer, having come as an editor, if you can't boil your story down to like a paragraph or two paragraphs, you probably don't understand well enough how it works.
Yeah.
And I've been in the case of, I've been pitching something right now, and it is, and sometimes you have to write out the whole thing. And sometimes when you write the whole thing, you think like, oh, I got it. But then you go to the point like, all right, I've written out this whole thing. I've beaten it out issue by issue. Oh, but I don't know how to describe it in a paragraph. That usually means there's something integral in the story that you've used all that detail to hide the fact that there's something about the story that you don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's your middle, maybe it's like the integral genre piece, like who the bad guy is, or the fact maybe you don't have a bad guy when you think an antagonist when you think you have an antagonist, all these kind of things. So whatever you can do to sort of shrink down the way you pitch it is actually a tool. That doesn't mean it has to start that way. I definitely a person who works big, but then it's all about whittling. It's like, what's the core concept of it?
Yeah.
And what else do I do? I always write the first. Actually, did I for Infidel? For Infidel, I did this, but I usually have a first script ready by the time I talk to an artist, and then what I do is I rewrite it when the artist is involved, so I can kind of see, so I can use, so I can kind of tailor it to them. But like when I pitch a book, it is, I have the script, I have 8 pages of the art done, and so I've gotten sort of my team together. What else do we have? We have character sketches. We have a 2-page document detailing sort of the story. And I think one of the things we do too, I think that in that 2-page document, it's like, in a nutshell, in a nutshell, there's a log line. This is the protagonist. This is the story. And what you want to do is have every section. What you think you're doing is you're splitting it up as like different things, different categories to make it sort of easy to read. But what you don't realize, or what you're actually doing, is you're breaking it down. Those categories are actually how you're telling the story. So like you could say, this is my hook. Okay, so hook's like, oh, that gets them to lean in. Well, these are my themes. Okay, this is what the story's going to be about. This is the context. This is when it takes place. This is how it takes sort of place. Then it can be, I just did one that's about, can't remember what happens after that. It might be, this is the premise. So the premise, that is in one sense what the solicitation copy might be, but it's also what your first issue will probably be too.
Yeah.
And then this is the protagonist, and that tells you the character and the character story you're going to tell. And this is the story. And whenever I put down what the story is, hopefully if I've done my job right, what the person reading it doesn't realize is, oh, you're actually reading, if you're thinking of it as a movie, acts 2 and 3 of it, because in that sort of setup, in those categories, I've set up the entire first act of sort of my story. But it is a way to do it so you break it down so it, on the one hand, it feels piecemeal, so a editor can look at it and be like, oh, I instantly know what that is. But when you line them up all together, you're actually telling a story in the process. That's all really abstract, and it's one of the reasons why I put like sort of the pitch. Again, this sounds like naked shilling for my stuff, but part of the reason why I put the pitch is I do kind of want people, like, I when I was working at Vertigo, we used to give out Volume 3 of Sandman Dream Country all the time, and it was because Neil Gaiman's script was in there, and it was and so many comic book writers learned how to write, at least the ones who came through Vertigo, and some of the ones who didn't come through Vertigo, who tried to or try to come from other mediums, they learned how to write from reading Neil Gaiman's script. But I had never seen sort of a pitch so that someone could see what a pitch looks like. And so I wanted people to see what a pitch looks like. And again, like that, I didn't do anything else but that pitch to get the book, and that's 100% how I pitch a book.
And then for The Good Asian itself, how did you start development on it, and like where did that like kind of escalate to near the end?
I mean, I think for me it was, there was just a ton of research, a ton of research that I sort of did. And as you're doing the research, you're kind of trying to figure out, like, you've got all this sort of stuff. And to me, the process, you're constantly whittling it down to sort of like, what's the hook? What's that idea that you can kind of wrap it around? How do you talk about it in a sentence or 2 sentences and all that? And because once you know that, then you kind of know, all right, you can kind of tell like sort of what aspects of the book you want to lead with when you're trying to hook people on. So once I had sort of all that, I'm trying to think, I think I came up with sort of like my 2-page, I think I did something like a 2-page pitch document just to make sure I had it clear in my head. In my 2-page pitch document too, it's also kind of like why this book matters now, why this book, and all that. And then I think from there, the first person I went to was my friend Will Dennis, who's my editor on the book. And Will, recommended my first Chandler novel to me. Will Dennis edited Scalped. He edited 100 Bullets. He edits now Nocterra and Jeff Lemire's books and Rick Remender's books. So he edits all the great Image books. He edits almost all the great crime comics.
Yeah.
And he's like one of my best friends in comics. So it was such a no-brainer to go to him. It's like, Will, if you don't like this book, then I've done something wrong. So either you love this or you tell me what I can do to make this a book you're gonna love, because this is so tailor-made for you.
Yeah.
Like, And that's, well, that was the process. And then from there he flipped over the concept. He has some great notes, as he always does. And then it was a matter of like looking for an artist. And I knew I wanted an Asian artist for this, primarily because just for a shorthand in terms of like things that details that I wouldn't have to sort of describe, to go into minutia and all that sort of stuff. And so that there could be sort of an authenticity in detail, that, because as opposed to someone who might have learned this sort of stuff from like watching anime or something like
Yeah,
that. So
yeah.
then you're just getting someone who is doing an interpretation of an interpretation. And one of the things that actually was really gratifying to find was, it was really hard to find an artist for a while. Like, so many of the Asian artists that were working were like taken up and booked up on stuff, and we're like, oh
Yeah.
wow, you know things had changed a lot sort of since when I was an editor. And we got enormously lucky that it was at New York Comic Con that Alex Tefengi was catching up with Cliff Chang, and he was just wrapping out Outpost Zero for Skybound. And Alex has a fascinating story in himself, is that he was born in Africa, raised in France, and I think for a long time he thought his father was sort of half Lebanese, and one of the things he found out very late in his life was that he was adopted, and that his father was sort of actually Vietnamese or partially Vietnamese, and very late in his life, at like 34, he found out he was Asian, and he did not know this. And so he was so passionate about this, and so inspired by this, that he moved his entire family to Vietnam just to get closer to his Vietnamese roots and to learn that aspect of himself. And so he was telling this whole story to Cliff, and saying like, oh, I'm looking for my next job. And Cliff was like, I know the exact book you need to be working on right now. And so Cliff, like, because Cliff is a friend of me and Will's, and knew we were looking for an artist, and he's like, you guys have to like talk to Alex. And then Alex's art was like amazing. And then we talked, and we're just like, oh my God, yes, we have to work together for this.
Yeah.
This is so perfect. And so that's how Alex came to it. Lee came from, I've known Lee forever. He was part of a couple different colorists that we gave Alex, and Alex instantly flipped over what Lee did. So he became a no-brainer. Jeff Powell is someone I work with from Infidel, and I love working with Jeff so much. He gives like 150% to everything. And that's how the book. And then after that, we pitched it to Image, and they were on board.
When you started, did you want it to be noir, or like did that come through like as it was developing?
The noir came. The noir came almost immediately. I because partly for me, what I found interesting is, as you're kind of spinning through that Rolodex of like, I want to talk about this. Like, how do you talk about this? Was the and when I was younger, I was fascinated with sort of the Asian crime solvers in the 1930s, like Charlie Chan and Mr. Moto and like Mr. Wong. And Charlie Chan especially was enormously popular. Oh wow, I lost all lights there. It was Charlie Chan especially was enormously popular, and with like I think over 50 movies. It was a global franchise, and it was fascinating and its heyday was in the 1930s. And it was amazing to me after learning about the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred Chinese immigrants from coming into America from 1882 to 1943, and the Immigration Act of 1924 that banned all Asians and Arabs coming into America after 1924, to that, wow, these Asian crime solvers were so popular, and yet Asian immigrants couldn't actually enter the country. So that felt like such an interesting juxtaposition. And then, so once I was looking at that, then noir kind of became like the natural sort of genre. And then too, it was like, if you look at sort of like the tropes and of a noir, it fits so well the story I wanted to tell, the jadedness, the conflict between the character. And when it ticks off the boxes like that, again, like going back to what I said earlier, it's all about sort of like where you plant your soil. So there was such fertile soil, and everything lined it up. And like going back to what you said, it wasn't a case where this is what I want to talk about, but all the things I need to do as part of the story are way over here. They were all on top of each other.
Yeah.
So it came together pretty quickly.
And I just remember this now. If anybody wants to prepare for this book, there is a great Criterion playlist on the app that they have right now of just Asian noir.
Oh, oh, I have to check that out.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
it's like just a bunch of Japanese noir movies, as far as I know.
That's
And
awesome.
I've been watching them because like whenever I have free time, I try to watch a Criterion movie so I can feel
Yeah.
smarter.
Yeah.
And they're just fun. They're like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's some Kurosawa ones in there too, and it's like, and now I'm thinking about it, it's that's another reason why this book hits so hard, because I've been watching all those movies and
That's amazing.
they just fit.
That's amazing.
I can't remember the name of the Kurosawa one off the top of my head, but the whole thing is about a detective who loses his gun. And
Oh, wow.
the whole movie is him trying to get his gun back, and then the person who has his gun starts committing murders, and
That's
so
great.
it's a brilliant, like, slow burn, like a detective story.
I have to look into that more. I most of my Kurosawa knowledge is on his samurai movies and
Yeah,
not his noir, and I
yeah,
really need to bone up on his noir movies because they
yeah.
are fantastic.
I'll look up the name right after this, so I can tell you
Okay.
what it is. But yeah, but there's other ones in there that are just a lot of fun, and I think, like, if anybody wants to prepare for this book, because it comes out Wednesday, so you have a couple days.
Yeah.
Like, just download that app, get like a free subscription for like a week, and just watch a couple of those. Like, 'cause I think it's a good way to prepare yourself for like what the story is, because it fits like perfectly. Another question I had is, what do you personally hope people get out of the story, like, in general?
Oh God. I mean, more than anything, I hope they're entertained. I hope they're entertained and compelled and moved and thrilled, like all the things I feel where when I'm reading a good noir mystery, but also when I'm reading a great like comic, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I'm such a fan of comics, and the thing about if you look at crime comics, like all the best comic writers have like worked in crime, so it's such a high bar. So I'm trying my best to just give as close to the experience that I get when I'm reading Brubaker or Azzarello or Bendis or Jason Aaron or Darwin Cook or Frank Miller. So I'm really just trying to get there. And then it as a secondary thing, like I hope they learn stuff about Asian American history that they didn't know before, and I hope that inspires them to learn a little bit more specifically Asian American history, but just also about American history, about how
Yeah.
so many facets of it, especially sort of for marginalized communities, have been sort of left out of the history that we teach, and that hopefully we acknowledge a lot more of it. There's a ton that I don't know. There's a ton that I don't know about everything. So yeah. So I mean, and that's something like I'm continually wanting to learn more about.
And I think, like, again, stories like these are so important, because the older I get, and because I like to think that I'm old, but I'm still pretty young, so like it's a weird middle ground. But
Yeah.
like I talk to friends all the time. It's like it really is becoming more and more apparent how much we didn't understand the phrase that we were taught, that history is written by the
Yeah.
victors. How much that actually is just kind of screwed up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Because
it's funny.
there's so many stories that
Yeah.
are just gone, or
Yeah.
missing, that are so important.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
You know, we are at a time now that which is interesting where we're having more of a conversation about challenging the stories that we're told.
Yeah.
And that is really exciting. And it is, to go into your point, like it is forcing us to take a look at like, oh, well, what are the consequences of, history of being told by the victors?
Yeah. Um, Very last question, and
Sure.
is, I know that you talked about in the word balloon that you want to do more of these stories
Yeah.
if they're successful. But one of my favorite things about noir is, if noir is super successful, there's spin-offs. And like the characters
Hmm.
that show up in multiple stories get their own spin-offs, and like you can kind
Oh,
of see
that's
other
interesting.
areas of noir. Do you have characters in this first run that you like, I would love to tell their story that's separate,
Yes.
because I would love to see like kind of a Good Asian kind of universe, if that makes sense.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. Yes, the answer is 100% yes. The thing for the Good Asian that I would need to figure out in order for that to happen is, it feels to me now that every volume of the Good Asian takes a whole lot of research and work on my
That's fair.
part.
That's fair.
So if I could find the right person to make that easier for me, so I don't have to
You need a
do
research
that
assistant.
entire, yeah, or even like if there's someone who knows more about this aspect, and I'll lend out that character for them to sort of tell that sort of story. There is a Good Asian universe that I absolutely would like to fill out. I can guarantee it's not going to happen as quickly as I would like it to,
Yes. Yeah.
because of all the research and work that's involved in the book.
Pornsak, thank you for coming on and talking with me about this. This has been like one of the most fun books I've read recently, and one of the most fun talks I've had recently.
Thank you.
Where can people find you to get updates on the book and just follow you for like your words of wisdom and like just stuff you like?
To follow me for stuff I like, because Lord knows there won't be any words of wisdom, is real_pornsak on Twitter, and real_psac on Instagram.
Yeah, hearing that they don't like the name porn in any username on Instagram, it's like, man, Zuckerberg, you have weird standards.
Yeah, no, they have very weird standards there. They have very weird standards.
For this show, you can follow us on Twitter at YComicsPod, Facebook at facebook.com/YComicsPodcast. You can email me at ycomicspodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions for a guest, want to be a featured guest on the show, or have a story about how comics impacted you and you want that read on air, you can reach me at any of those places. Please leave a review and tell a friend if you like the show. The logo is done by Andy Manley. Banners are by my friend Steven. And the theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay. And lastly, everybody, remember that Captain America also punched Nazis.